The concept of something in the woods just beyond our light of our campfires when humanity had a little more hair and a little less technology is something that is prevalent in all cultures across the planet. And with good reason too, because likely there was. Animals such as bears and large cats would be less inclined to approach a fire at night with a bunch of people around it. However, tread too far into those woods and you would likely get grabbed, whisked away into the darkness, and never seen again as you become a cautionary tale to the next group of youngins to abide by. As humanity continued up its technological scale, however, eventually we started clearing woods and creating open spaces for our homes. Our homes became sturdier, able to withstand most animals outside. Our dwellings became larger, as well as with camps growing into villages, which grew into towns and then cities. Over time, humanity began to realize there was nothing supernatural in the woods, just animals as it's always been. But still, the stories persist about other creatures out there lurking in the darkness, and despite how far we've come in exploring and owning this world, I would wager a lot of you are like me. When you look out into the tree line at night through a window, you wonder if there's something staring back. When you go to sleep, do you ever think about what's outside of the walls of your home separating you from what's stalking? In a small town in Maiden Woods in upstate New York, a logging project to clear out materials north of a small town surrounded by woods would start having pets and horses disappear over the course of a few nights. As the sheriff began investigating what is happening, eventually he wakes up to find the evidence that something has been stalking the town and its inhabitants, getting closer and closer, and even leaving footprints from its late night activities right outside his own home, which is actually based on a true story, believe it or not. But what exactly is this creature and where did it come from? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode. But first, this episode is sponsored by Factor. With the holidays coming up, I bet you're a lot like me. You're going to consume untold amounts of calories, fall asleep in front of the TV a lot and say, well, if I'm going to be eating Thanksgiving leftovers for the next week, why go to the gym? Then with all that said, you're going to start to feel sluggish and tired. December is also trashed because you're just going to be napping after work. That sounds like you because again, it is me. Then Factor may be what you're looking for. Factor offers 34 meals per week and up to 36 add-ons like smoothies, juices, snacks, and more to keep you going. With choices like Protein Plus, Keto, Vegetarian, and healthy eating in general, you can keep on track with your goals and feel better by eating more nutritious foods. I personally go with the high protein meals, seeing as I'm doing more weightlifting lately, it helps fuel me to keep me working out and make the most of my lifts. So if that sounds like things that you would be into, then by heading to go.factor75.com/Roanoke60 and using code Roanoke60, you can get 60% off your first Factor box today. All right, let's get back to it. We kick off our story in the deep woods. Looks great for hiking, apparently even better for logging. The crew is working for the day, and as they wrap up and head out for the weekend, everyone starts clearing out. The foreman is waiting up at the front as the crew begins leaving. As one of the loggers drives by, he tells the foreman that Jesse's crew is still out there. He gets on the radio calling over to them, but Jesse has got problems of his own, it seems. The radio is on the ground and the equipment is scattered around, indicating that Jesse and his crew likely aren't having a good time. As the foreman continues to call out, Jesse gets to the radio but can't get a word out before getting got. The foreman then heads over to the site and begins calling out but gets no one. Hearing radio static, he spots Jesse behind a tree with the radio. Only it isn't Jesse. Now, actually, I guess it's part of Jesse. As he rounds the corner, he's got an arm off. Might have to blur that out, but the humerus bone is completely exposed. Blood begins dripping on his shoulder as he looks up and spots what's left of his worker. As with normal people, this prompts the foreman to GTFO at this point because no thanks. As he gets back to his truck, it's clear that something is hunting him. His truck doesn't start either because of course, why would it? And he hears heavy footsteps behind him. He looks back as something breaks through the window, tearing him apart in his truck. If this truck's a rockin', don't come a knockin'. We now head over to Maiden Woods. Nice town. You have your church, your main street, a sheriff crying at the playground with a dark past. You know, all the standards. He and his deputy are heading over to a horsery. Someone actually told me what these are actually called in the video Nope, but for the life of me, I cannot remember. Anyhow, we see how many people actually live in Maiden Woods, and it's set at 243, although it should probably be set at 242. So it's a real small town, and it's actually kind of a dream of mine to live in a town like that, but my wife completely hates small towns. Basically, she's a mega nerd. Dunking on the wife aside, as they head to the horse farmer, the guy is upset because he had 23 horses yesterday, but now he has 22 today. The sheriff says there's no truck tracks, maybe the horse just got loose. The owner continues yelling about missing horse 88, but the deputy says he definitely just left the gate open, which the sheriff agrees as he looks out and spots the daughter. Now, if the ancient texts hold true, to date a farmer's daughter, you're gonna either need a 1969 Mustang or a 67 Impala. I guess you could go with a 68 Dodge Challenger if you're just like a mega nerd, but you also have to be okay with getting shotgun blasts in it. Otherwise, it's just not gonna work. But then they head back towards town. So now we meet the sheriff's family, now borderline estranged family. His son Adam and his wife-ish Susan. We also get some backstory on the deputy. It seems that he was up in New York, but left for some reason. Does all law enforcement in town have some horrible backstory that plagues them? The answer is yes. As Paul talks to his estranged wife, Susan, she brings up how she's been getting therapy and they could go together, but Paul says he's not the one that left. Then he takes off and heads home. That night, as Paul makes French toast for his son, he starts asking downer questions about when's mom coming home and is this about Tim? You know, the type of questions kids ask because there's actually no filter there and it makes you question your whole existence. Sort of like if a kid says you're ugly, you're actually probably ugly. It's a brutalization sort of stuff. Then as they sit there, the kid spots something move across the window. And here's where old dad has got some terrible advice for his son. As he goes to take a look, his son wants him again to go outside and check it out, but to take the force multiplier as well. Paul says that he doesn't need to take it because he's gonna go back there and prove to him there's nothing to be afraid of out there. Okay, weird flex because bears absolutely do still exist at this latitude, and I'm fairly certain black bears actually are up there. There's a lot of things to actually be scared of in the woods because to be scared of something is to respect the possibility that you could absolutely get bodied by something. So he heads out and calls out to whatever it is, but as he walks around, he also gets spooked because he hears something, but it doesn't sound like a human as it sits high up in the trees cracking branches. He then heads back inside and puts his boy to sleep as he spots his other son's bed. Like, bro, it's probably time to mourn, my dude. But he heads out and then goes to sleep. The next morning, as he's getting ready for work, the deputy comes inside. He asks if Adam is still asleep, as then he asks Paul if he's been outside yet. He motions for him to follow him as they exit out the front door. Looking at the ground, there are massive tracks all around the house. As Paul follows them, he sees that some of them appear that they were looking in his window at night. The spacing is wrong to be a horse, and it also appears that this thing is on 2 feet. They continue following the tracks as apparently they go all throughout town. And now it's story time, because this is actually based on supposedly real events. In the town of Topsham, England, I'm pretty sure that's how you say it, in 1855, an event took place known as the Devil's Footprints. Between February 8th and 9th, during the night, in 1855, after a heavy snowfall, a series of hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. These footprints, most of which measured around 4 inches or 10 centimeters long and 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters across, with between about 8 to 16 inches apart, mostly in a single file, were reported at more than 30 locations across Devon and a couple across Dorset. And I'm pretty sure there's gonna be an English guy in the comments like, that's not how you pronounce it. USA, baby. It was estimated that the total distance of the tracks amounted to between about 40 to 100 miles or 60 to 160 kilometers. Houses, rivers, haystacks, and other obstacles were traveled straight over. Footprints appeared on tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls which lay in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting drain pipes as small as 4 inches, about 10 centimeters in diameter. Also, if it sounds like I'm saying centimeters weird, I bit the hell out of my tongue the other day, and apparently that's just a word that causes me to use that part of my tongue. So, what in the name of all that is holy is that? Well, likely it was actually a prank with some remembrances being off, but still highly interesting. So, back to the movie. So the town is obviously a little spooked by this. The sheriff and deputy follow the footprints into the woods a fair ways back. As they do, the tracks abruptly end. The sheriff looks around and spots claw marks in the trees, but no other sign of the creature. Paul at this point calls for the forest rangers. They inform him that no animal that they know of would match that description, but he would appreciate it if they would come check it out. They think it's a prank, so they elect not to help. Great use of our tax dollars. As Paul leaves the station, we get more backstory. The Padre is there to discuss how his dog has gone missing, and that Paul also needs to mourn and that the church is there. But everyone is down to follow Paul as long as he leads them correctly. Exposition! As a deputy works on paperwork, he also finds a picture of Paul's other son. Paul is now being questioned at the gas station by the townspeople. Jim is a little upset as there's a lack of action. He questions Paul about why they aren't hunting this thing down right now, and I get it, but they don't even know what they're dealing with yet. Paul keeps trying to calm everyone by saying it's obviously just a prank, bro, but Jim thinks it's the deputy because he's a city guy stirring things up. Okay then. Walking outside, we actually do get some real information though. Earl flags down the sheriff and asks if he's been in the trees lately. Paul tells him about the prints, which Earl responds there are no animals within 5 miles of the town. Like they all just got up and vanished. Paul asks why they would do that, to which Earl says that usually means there's a new predator in the area as they can sense it there, so they noped out of there. Heading back to Susan's mom's house, he talks to Susan and she starts asking about where he is mentally, and Paul ain't doing so hot, bro. That's the sort of like white knuckling through horrible stuff that you probably need to talk about. But as Paul and Adam drive through to Paul's house at night, Adam freaks out saying he saw something. He yells for his dad to stop as Paul looks out and then spots an animal running like something that I don't know about you, but I normally wouldn't see. He then chases it as it climbs up into the trees. He looks around and hears a metallic rustling, finding the halter for the number 88 horse. Going back to his truck, his son is gone, so he runs into the house as the kid was hiding because he heard something outside side of the car and also noped out of there. Meanwhile, at a bar, Donnie is having a few drinks as he talks to Earl. Earl asks Donnie how much does he know about the woods and this place. He then tells him a story about the spirits in the tree and how previously back in the day, when the trees were disturbed, the spirits came for every man, woman, and child. He then goes on to tell them about a boy that went missing when they found him. He was 30 feet up in a tree. You know, probably not good stuff. The next morning, Susan and Paul meet with Adam's teacher to discuss a horrible word that he said. Brace yourself for it. He said pecker. I know, pearl clutching abound. But as they talk, the teacher gets upset because obviously Susan and Paul thinks it's funny because it's really not that big of a deal. So the teacher way oversteps and mentions how Adam needs to stop referring to his dead brother in the present tense, which activates the mama bear instincts of Susan as she shuts the teacher down faster than a babysitter's boyfriend when the car pulls up, which honestly, she deserved that. So Susan and Paul leave as she tries to hug Paul, but he just kind of posts up and doesn't hug back. Ooh, that was awkward. So Paul drives over to the graveyard where his son is and spots a deputy waving at him. Donnie goes to talk to him as they start hearing a bunch of birds. They look up as apparently a mass migration has begun and the birds are noping out. Donnie and Paul go to get lunch as they discuss what Earl told Paul. It's not a migration as they were flying north, not south, but the animals are all going missing. Paul still doesn't believe there's a monster in the woods, but as Donnie brings up the boy they found in the trees, Paul says it wasn't monsters, it was humans. Yep, pretty much. I mean, in this case, it's probably monsters, but humans are also monsters. Bad things happen because people let them happen. Now, rounding back to humans are monsters, some humans are monsters. Others are really good. That night, we also see Paul is considering divorce with Susan as he's opened a petition. So yeah, again, Paul ain't doing so hot as previously mentioned. We get some more backstory on Donnie at this point. He became a cop because he spent so much time bailing his old man out of jail that he figured, why not become one? Which prompts Susan to tell Donnie about what happened. Apparently, Paul was supposed to be watching Tim. They had a kiddie pool, which then Tim's kind of slipped and then hit his head on the bottom and got knocked unconscious and subsequently drowned. Now, fun fact, depending on what your definition of fun is, that almost kind of actually happened to my brother. Apparently, it was at some party. I was super young. My dad was holding me and my brother went missing for like 2 minutes. Old man got a feeling he may have fallen into the pool, dropped me, ran over there to find my brother at the bottom of the pool looking up. So pretty wild stuff. So at this point, I think the thing to know is this crap happens all the time. Watch your kids around water. All it takes is a few minutes of not noticing. Anyhow, Susan doesn't blame Paul, but he blames himself, hence the depression. So as Paul sits there not having a good time, he's hallucinating his son running around, which is pretty standard actually. High amounts of stress will trigger that. Sort of like how you see a dead loved one's face in a stranger when you're walking down the road sort of scenario. But he gets a call from the horse farmer guy, the horsery, the horse keeper. What is he called? Anyways, he talks about how last night someone was banging on the side of the barn. Paul calms him down, but as he does, something then jumps and breaks the light. Paul goes to check it out as he spots an animal run through the hay and jump the fence. He doesn't know what it was because it was too dark and he only saw a leg. He says that they will come back in the morning and check it out. So now it's morning. They find claw marks all over the side of the barn as something was clearly trying to break in. As they look at the prints, they find that there's actually, and I'm not sure the best way to say it, but basically 3 hoof points making contact with the ground. So these aren't horse hoof prints. As Paul looks up, he finds that there are no natural animals that would actually possess this. However, there is one, and it's kind of funny because it calls it a Wendigo, but when you actually click on that link, it just says there is no Wendigo, it's a Wendigo. Maybe it's just a local thing, I don't know. Anyways, I literally went to that link. So basically, they're saying it's a Wendigo. Paul drives way out of town and finds that there's actually still animals there, but they've been torn apart. Heading back into town, it's time to have some lunch with the family. Adam starts asking when they can go home together, right in the gut, and Susan says it's complicated, to which Adam's like, oh, do you still love each other? And Susan doesn't know, but Paul finally answers yes. We do still love each other, but it's not that simple, which gives Susan some hope and then just completely destroys it. Just remember, you can't take away something from somebody that has nothing. You have to give them something first to take it away. Anyways, this does give Susan hope that they'll be able to mend their relationship. That night, things are about to get way worse. A weather system is moving in and it's gonna start dumping snow. The deputy goes to the gas station to drink coffee near the squirrel and hit on the attendant. Paul is patrolling around where he finds a deer in the road. He goes to check out its body and move it out of the center of the road, but finds it's disemboweled as something is moving in the tree line. There's not believing in there's monsters with no evidence, but considering what Paul has seen, you wouldn't catch me outside of that cruiser. Something then lunges at Paul as he heads back to the cruiser. He looks down for like half a second and then looks up, seeing that the deer carcass is completely gone and something's in the woods. He heads back to the bar to talk to Donnie at this point. Paul begins telling Donnie that the deer looked older, like it couldn't keep up with a younger deer, and that the horse didn't just get out of the gate along with the claw marks. The claw marks in the deer creature sort of confirmed to him that, you know what, maybe there is something out there despite only seeing glimpses of it, 3 or 4 times. The deputy confirms that, hey, we find things all the time that we didn't think were alive but actually are. As Paul and Donnie go to leave, we get this absolute clown known as Jim once again. So let me ask you something. You live in a small town. Would you start picking a fight with the sheriff about his deceased son and how he couldn't protect him? So how can he protect the town? Like, bro, what is your angle here? Get hit with a police baton in the face? Jeez, what a jackass. The next morning, it's the last bit of deer season and some hunters are in the woods looking for the deer. However, they become the hunted at this point as something is moving around in the trees. As an attack begins, a hunter gets one shot off, but it doesn't sound like much. Back at the station, we finally figure out why Donnie came to the small town. Looks like he took some lead to the meat suit. Apparently, him and his old man were shot together. His life was going well and boom, derailed. So he figures maybe he just wasn't where he was supposed to be. Maybe here is where he was supposed to be, to protect people. Who knows, because back out of the road, as Paul returns to where the deer was, he sees the blood is still there at mile marker 5 and hears that there's something else in the woods again. But he starts hallucinating that he's hearing Tim as he calls out for him, but then a hunter grabs him, telling him that something is behind him. They then go back to the station. The hunter tells him about the attack and how all of his friends are gone. There's no need to look for them, which, that's not suspicious at all. Paul then still doesn't understand how this animal could go unnoticed for so long. This would mean it knows how to hide and may even know that humans are a threat, and because of that, it's intelligent. Earl now calls Paul and Donnie as they get there and spot the other hunters up in the tree, and Jim is an absolute idiot. I hate Jim. Jim is basically Amy. Paul tells them to get out of the woods, right? Because it's pretty much for their safety. Well, Jim protests, saying it's the last 2 weeks of hunting season. Bro, their bodies literally torn to shreds, pulled up into trees, and these guys were armed. You really want to be out in those woods for deer? Like, what are you even thinking? Nothing could possibly be what you're thinking. Paul issues the order to get everyone in their homes before nightfall. Paul calls the forest rangers once more, to which they finally agree to come out with 24 men and 24 hours to hunt down whatever is causing the issue. But now the storm is moving in, so the roads are starting to close. The town is now completely cut off, as apparently most of the town has chosen to leave to not be trapped there, as just a few choose to stay. Kind of reminds me of 30 Days of Night, to be honest with you. But Susan calls Paul to tell him thanks for taking Adam and that she loves him. Call back, man. Donnie now arrives with information, but Paul puts it together that the logging operation caused this creature to be flushed out towards them as it continues to push south. Paul then gets a knock on the door, and it's Jimmy Boy, Jim John, Jimaroo. Jim has a trail cam that he's been using in the forest that he keeps for bucks. Something comes by and knocks over the camera, but in one frame, we see a hominid-shaped creature. Paul keeps the picture as Donnie mentions how the cell service is down, which always happens in a storm. And not a good time for these things to be wandering around because it's finally entering the town. As Paul continues to look for pictures, he hears something trying to break into his home. They run up to the bathroom to hide from this thing as it begins walking through the house looking for them. Paul calls out to Donnie on the radio as he starts heading back to the house. And we get a good look at its feet with 3 claws, which can either be curled up to walk on or outstretched in attack mode. As Donnie arrives, it scares the creature away as Paul goes to check with Adam locking the door. The creature runs past Donnie, knocking him down as he takes a pot shot at it. Paul and Donnie now gather up the townspeople to stay in the church, or really what's left of the town. He starts telling them about the logging camp and the bodies in the trees. The next morning, the forest department will be there and have rangers crawling all over the woods looking for this thing. They just need to survive the night and they'll be good to go. I feel like a more defensible location would have been better. Maybe a bar, less windows, thicker walls, head to the Winchester, have a pint, and wait for this whole thing to blow over sort of scenario. So Paul looks through some pictures of what his son has been drawing, family-friendly sort of stuff, as Donnie then sits with Earl talking about hope. He gets up and then goes to talk to Claire as he finally makes his move. Paul tells Susan he can't protect these people because he couldn't protect Tim, as it finally all comes out. He sees Tim and he feels like he's going crazy. So the reconciliation begins between him and Susan as he finally stops being a weirdo and actually hugs his wife, but it's short-lived as this thing has arrived at the church. Thinking quickly, he asks the priest about the shelter in the basement. It's jam-packed full of stuff, but it sure beats being out here. They head down there as the creature breaks in upstairs. Paul kisses his wife, hugs the kid, and goes off to do paladin activities. You know, battle class in a church. Trust me, it works. Paul tells Jim to hold the door, handing him a force multiplier as Donnie and him ascend the stairs. Then the power gets cut because of course it does, but moving through, the door has been broken open and they can't see much. Continuing on, so too does the creature, knocking over chairs, climbing walls, but Paul tells Donnie to stay there and don't let the creature get around him as he heads to the back of the church to confront the thing. Heading into the Sunday school area, it's clear this thing is back there. However, outside, another shadow appears in the kitchen. Donnie then heads in there, finding the prince in the flour as he gets grabbed by it, but he lets out a shot near his left ear. Donnie is like 149% deaf in that ear now. The creature approaches him as he lets out some more shots, tagging it. Donnie has been cut, but he's alright and tells Paul to go get the creature and that he'll be fine. So now Paul begins to hunt the hunter. Around the corner, well, there it is. He attacks it as it grabs the force multiplier, stopping him from hitting it directly. Paul then runs off and starts hiding underneath the pews to get the upper hand again as it begins walking by. He unclips his sidearm as it hears it and kicks the pews. Paul lets off a shot as the thing climbs the wall behind him and jumps down, squaring up. And look me in the eyes and tell me this thing doesn't look like a Goomba from the Mario movie, or at least related to it somehow. Paul then lets out a few shots, hitting it, but it continues its attack. He's able to get his knife out and gut it, ending the creature in the process. Limping back to the group with Donnie, they manage to overtake the creature and all's well. They get everyone out of there to come out of the shelter, telling everyone that, it's safe. So now we have a big happy reunion as everything is gonna be fine. So it ends on a happy note. Or does it? Examining the body, Donnie comes to the horrifying revelation that, wait a minute, I took a chunk out of this thing's shoulder. How did it heal? Well, that's because it didn't. Panning to the outside of the church, the place is crawling with these things, literally, and that's where it ends. My guess is they are completely screwed unless they head to that choke point earlier and just keep firing. So where to begin? I think we need to first establish, does this creature appear to hail from our realm of life, or is it something completely supernatural? On this channel, I have been known to occasionally cover things that really are supernatural creatures, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched, but I actually don't believe this is anything more than a naturally occurring species, at least in this universe. The running theme throughout this movie is how could an animal hide for this long without us having some eventual run-in with it, but the fact is we already have. As Earl was telling Donnie, back in the day, Europeans arrived and took over the whole area. They were told about the dangers in the woods, but refused to adhere to the warnings. Because of this, every man, woman, and child in that town was wiped out. The thing to know about upstate New York is also the woods are quite expansive, and despite the country's largest city being located in that state, there are huge swaths of land absolutely covered in forests and actually have some pretty good hiking trails, but is fairly dense and with few towns in between. In fact, the state itself is covered in forests up to 61%, with roughly 18,600,000 acres of deep woods. Because of this, is it possible that something has gone unseen in our more modern age? And now I have to ask the question, why does this channel start sounding more and more like Ancient Aliens? On literally the heels of what I've just said, clearly I would have to say yes, it has apparently gone unseen. But given that in the movie there is already stories about this creature existing, man had really already come into contact with the species several times before, hence the warning to stay clear of them. All throughout human history exist stories that were actually there to serve as warnings to others. In fact, arguably, that's where most of humanity's fairy tales come from. They're simply there to serve as warnings to children, and I guess people in general, about literally the people and events that we may encounter in the world that we inhabit. Of course, usually they are bolstered with some ethereal aspect, and that causes them to be more easily remembered. But enough of the mythos of these creatures. The takeaway is this: I don't believe that they come from a different planet or are entirely supernatural. What I do believe is the people living in these areas prior to Europeans coming over already knew of a dangerous animal living in the woods, using trees to move around and hunt that could overpower man. And they are the creature that are called the Wendigo. Because while modern lead being flung into the body most definitely hurts, imagine trying to take these things out with like bows in close combat. They would almost appear invincible given their hides and counterattack abilities. And speaking of hides, to figure out where they may have come from, we must first discuss why these things are even so dangerous in the first place. And thankfully the movie, they did it correctly. There's a lot of examples of the foot to analyze, which we can extrapolate to the hands as well. And for all new people, I'm required by law to tell you I am in no way, shape, or form a dude into feet. It was a meme, we just leaned into it, and now the whole channel has become a giant meme from the drop. What can you do? Anyways, apart from that, we see with the feet that these creatures actually have two abilities. First is the attack mode, and second is traveling mode, which I will go over momentarily, but first, the creature has what appears to be 4 toes, but really, these are going to operate much like a hand does. And this is what's known as a prehensile foot. 3 of the toes are used for grasping, whereas the 4th toe appears to be more of a dew claw. Anyways, chimpanzees and many other apes have been known to have this type of foot, which can be used for grasping and walking as well. Typically, tree-dwelling animals will need this arrangement, as if they do not want to fall out of trees, then it becomes appropriate to have extra grasping limbs. The reason humans lost our prehensile feet a long time ago is because we collectively started started standing up more to see over tall grass as well as travel greater distances, and our feet needed to change shape to accommodate walking as opposed to grasping. This is a major indicator to me that these creatures are not supernatural in origin, but actually have a distinct evolutionary pathway given their adaptations to the natural world. Given that the foot is prehensile, the creature has adapted in a way to move around on the ground as well in order to chase prey, and because of that, they needed to have a way of actually getting their claws out of the line of fire, as this would dull their claws and in general make it more difficult to run. Like imagine running literally in scuba gear. That's what these claws would do to them. The adaptation to the feet is when the creature is covering vast distances. They will curl up their claws underneath the foot and sort of run on the knuckles of them. In doing so, this creates the three-hooved pattern that we have seen in the snow and when they were first walking around the town. The second adaptation is when it's time to move in for an attack. The claws will uncurl and move forward, allowing for the creature to walk on the balls of its feet for a time so that the creature can then eviscerate anything that it needs to attack. Along with this animal will have a back claw around the heel of the foot, much like how, again, other animals have dew claws, such as mammals, birds, and reptiles. The foot is also fairly elongated and continues up into a digitigrade structuring of the leg. The legs are fairly muscular from calf to thigh region, seeing as these creatures are able to run and leap vast distances almost in the blink of an eye. This would make these legs incredibly powerful. On them, like with the rest of the body, they are covered in a thick green scaly hide that is difficult to penetrate with anything but a powerful force multiplier. But if you only had, like, say, a force enhancer, aka a spear, it's very unlikely that you would do enough damage to actually slow this thing down if you went for its legs. Moving up to the abdomen, while we only see it for a moment, we can assume that since Paul was able to gut the thing much like with any other animals with scaly hides, the stomach is a weak zone for the body. The abdominal region also appears more lithe than the rest of the body, suggesting that this thing may actually have more vertebrae than we do as humans. This elongated appearance means that this creature is also a lot taller than man as well, likely somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 feet taller than a human when standing fully upright, or about 0.7 to 1 meter taller. The musculature build heading up to the thoracic region is fairly pronounced as well, with the shoulders being swole-goals. Moving down to the arms, we see they are built in the same way as primates are, with a bicep and tricep clearly visible, but unlike humans and like with primates, the forearms are longer, indicating that they are definitely living up in the trees. The hands are stocky given how long the arms are, but they are powerful and likely they also rely on the claws to a degree to make up for their more stocky fingers, which is why they tend to leave claw marks in the trees whenever they begin climbing. They have 3 fingers and 1 thumb-like appendage, meaning that they have the same amount of toes to fingers, which may actually indicate that these creatures are purely reptiles rather than potentially amphibious. The head of this creature is fairly interesting, but again, it looks Goomba-ish. It has a forward-facing head, meaning that the muscle holds up the skull as opposed to bone holding up the skull like with humans. And this sort of shows that while they may be as smart as an orangutan or chimpanzee, they are not as smart as humans. But that's sort of the issue, isn't it? These creatures, while not able to outsmart humans, given how powerful they are and their hunting abilities, can overpower man even when he's armed. Because of this, it gives them an edge over our species, and if there's a perfect storm of scenarios that renders a small group of people fighting them, it's probably game over for that small group of people. However, if a larger group of Homo sapiens were to come into contact with these creatures and actively know about them, it's likely it wouldn't be much of a fight at all, and this would result in the capture or neutralization of this species. On the face exists forward-facing eyes, which, as always, typically denotes a predator, but is not 100% steadfast in the ruling. While forward-facing eyes give you binocular vision and allow you to focus on movement, if you take something like a gorilla, for instance, it also has forward-facing eyes, but it's not exactly a hunter. Just figured I would continue to make that distinction. Non-hunting animals can absolutely have forward-facing eyes. The teeth of this creature are absolutely massive. When it peels back its armored lips, several jagged teeth can be seen protruding from the gums. Again, this thing is full predator, so these are used to bite down and inflict massive blood loss, leading to shock. Given the shape of the teeth, it may be similar to other reptiles in that they have a tremendous bite force as well to snap bones like twigs, which could also lead to further shock. The overall structure of these creatures is an animal that prefers to live in the trees, but will come down if the environment is disturbed, leading to bipedalism. They are larger than humans, can run faster, and in general have no issue tearing apart anything that it deems prey. On top of that, they appear to be social hunters, coming together as a pack to attack an entire town. But what's what's most interesting is their intellect that is shown when they scout out the town first, looking in windows and getting a feel for what the prey is doing, as opposed to me see, me eat. Evolutionarily speaking, how did these creatures come to be what they are? Well, evolution is a funny thing. It's not so much an order of succession like some people tend to believe, which I'll never understand. Just because the newer thing evolves doesn't mean the original branch isn't even still there or didn't splinter off to make a new, different version from you. So to understand their evolution, we have to kind of take a look at our own. Mammals, when we first came around roughly 178 million years ago, basically just a rat. Essentially, a reptile had a mutation where its scales became hair. In fact, if you look at mammalian hair, it looks almost exactly like plated scales. Anyhow, this hairy weirdo that produced milk and engaged in viviparous reproduction took off. Due to their smaller stature, when Earth started having really horrible times around 66 million years ago, they were able to scurry back into their burrows for survival. But one of the interesting things is we don't give early mammals or reptiles in general enough credit for their social ability. In fact, there is something known as Triassic cuttle, which is a fossil showing a Brumastega, which was a really old amphibian with eyes on top of its head, and a Thrinaxtodon, pretty sure I said that correctly, which was a reptile-like mammal covered in hair. Basically, something not so great was going on, and the Brumastega ran into the burrow and cuddled with a Thrinaxtodon for safety, as the burrow was then filled with floodwaters, taking them both out. Basically, animals are pretty social no matter the species. Well, that's not true. Cats aren't really that social, but cats can also be fairly social. Just remember that. But anyways, there's a reason I'm launching into this. With humans, as mammals evolved over time, this created primates, which were highly social creatures living in troops, till eventually humans would branch off from Homo erectus and then ultimately became Homo sapiens. Now, we're covering millions of years in time in just a sentence, but the key to our intellect and ability comes down to three things, really. Well, actually maybe four, potentially one depending on what you believe. Time, luck, environmental pressures, and protein. Humanity stood upright to see over grasses, moving our skulls backwards onto our spines due to the changes in landscape going from trees to large savannas. Humanity has lived during a relatively peaceful time frame on our planet, except for that one time where we almost went extinct and there were only like 2,000 of us left on the entire planet, living on a coastline eating clams for survival. That was really not an ideal time. Accompanied with luck is the time frame we have lived. Because it's been relatively quiet on this planet with no major impacts from space or massive diseases taking us out or anything of that nature, we have had time to evolve. Finally, protein. This allowed us to have larger brains and continue to grow them, which unlocked cooking to release even more nutrients. All of these things came together to make humanity. Unless your thing is that we were created, in which case there's really only one thing that led to us. Regardless of what you think is the reason what led to us, the ultimate reality is humanity absolutely dominates this planet as a result. No other species on this world at any point in time has had the ability to deep fry the planet or leave it as we so choose to do. And I mean, when I say leave it, can't really leave it large scale, but we have left it, and that's the important part. Now, all of this also can apply to these creatures, but on a different branch of life. If within the last several millions of years we can go from quadrupedal to semi-bipedal to fully bipedal, then it stands to reason that another creature could do this as well. In fact, potentially less time would be needed based on the fact that they aren't likely fully bipedal right now, just mostly. I believe these creatures from Dark Was the Night are reptilian, as you probably have gathered by now, given the scales, teeth, and claws. It's likely at some point in Earth's history, these creatures were on a similar pathway as mammals were. Considering reptiles back in the day were also quadrupedal, this would mean that eventually one of them stood upright, which obviously happened because as time progressed, we had dinosaurs who were archosaurs, which is basically just a larger group of reptiles. This in turn would cause them to have their head upright, then over time, they evolved on a separate pathway, sort of like primates did, but retained their reptilian traits. Because of their stature not being much larger than a man, this would require them to band together in order to hunt down larger animals that existed not so long ago, much like how man had to do. This could also mean that they were actually endotherms, believe it or not. For a creature to survive this far up north, more so with Earth having just come out of a real ice age and the subsequent little ice age actually not too long ago, it does hint that they are warming their bodies with their metabolism, which is time for some new lore. Did you know that basically it's hypothesized now that dinosaurs were mesotherms? Not quite ectotherms, but not quite endotherms either. They relied on both the heat from the environment, but also on their own metabolisms, which heated their bodies as well. This is why things like T-Rex could live in colder climates, as they also retained heat with their feathers. Because I believe it's hypothesized that T-Rexes actually used to live on ancient Antarctica as it was moving south and literally became a lost continent. Like, how awesome would it be to have actual access to the 7th continental landmass on Earth? We kind of got screwed with the time frame we're in right now. But back in the day, there used to be a rainforest on it, and then it started getting colder and colder and colder, and now it's just a giant glacier. Anyways, the reasoning behind man not knowing about these creatures, or at least recognizing them on a large scale, is because geologically speaking, humans only arrived in North America roughly 13,500 years ago, and that was on the west coast. It took time to migrate across the continent to where these creatures lived. Then, when people did come into contact with them, they told stories and warned one another about these things in the woods and to avoid that area. Then roughly only 250 years ago, Europeans came through and started spreading out. But even present day, while areas are hiked and we have satellite images of deep forests here in the US, we don't know 100% of what's out there. Given how they look and their wariness of humans, as the interactions seem to be minimal unless we barge into their territory, we don't see them hiding in the trees, and they appear to want to avoid humans for the most part, possibly understanding what we are given their increased intellect. And it's not like there aren't tons of stories anyways about things in the woods. And I also just have to point out, humans make a ton of noise all the time, so it's not like these things couldn't hear us from a mile away. However, once clear cutting their actual hunting space and where they were living, well, I'd probably be pissed too if someone came and cut apart my house while I was here writing this script, or at least recording it now. This forced an interaction from these creatures of legend. Likely they are the last few of their kind because more interactions were not that prevalent. It's possible at some point there were more of them, but through humans cutting down forests, this has kind of moved them over time and led to less of them existing. Ultimately, the entire concept of these creatures isn't really as ridiculous as you might imagine, because remember, during the early years of Homo sapiens, Neanderthalensis was running around interbreeding with our species as well, meaning it's entirely possible for different branches to yield similar results, but still strikingly different. Plus, the final nail in the coffin for me is how Paul was able to take these things out, which completely shows they are clearly natural born and bred animals. Using a standard knife and eviscerating it completely halted the chemical reaction of life. If this thing was truly a Wendigo, that involves burning it and then like bringing it to a churchyard and using silver, which in this town, they would have just been totally screwed. A Wendigo interaction also leaves you mentally vacant. Plus, they are excellent hunters and in no way, shape, or form are fearful of other humans. This is simply something that could be compared to a reptile version of a primate that humanity really hasn't categorized yet into a species list. And because of that, we call these creatures the average New Yorker. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be fantastic and appreciated. And if you enjoyed enough, subscribing is free and gets you updated on when I post. We are nearing 800k subs, which is awesome. I really do appreciate the support. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel links. I'm actually doing something different with Roanoke Games for like the 8th time. Not live streaming all the time, but posting gaming stuff there. We'll see how it does over the course of like the next year or so. But anyhow, speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our 2 astronauts, Lipsy Gingy and Wesley A. Weaver Jr. Thank you very much, guys. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Desk Dancer, and Phoenix, as well as our scientist, Countryside Limbo. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel going and is greatly appreciated. All right, well, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.